He never expected that the truth would reveal itself so suddenly or so cruelly. That evening had started like many others, quiet, ordinary, almost forgettable. He had come home earlier than planned, hoping to surprise his wife, maybe even salvage the distance that had grown between them over the past few months. Deployment had changed him, she had said. He believed her. He believed that time, patience, and love would fix what silence had broken. But the moment he stepped inside the house, something felt wrong. The air was heavy, charged with a tension he couldn't immediately explain. A pair of unfamiliar shoes sat near the door. Laughter, low, intimate, unmistakably not meant for him, drifted from the bedroom down the hall. His instincts, sharpened by years of combat and survival, told him the truth before his heart was ready to accept it. Each step toward the bedroom felt slower than the last, as if his body was trying to protect his mind from what he was about to see. When he pushed the door open, the world seemed to freeze. His wife stood there, panic flashing across her face, sheets hastily pulled up, guilt written so clearly that no explanation could soften it. Beside her was another man, confident, smug, entirely too comfortable in a place that was never meant for him. In that moment, memories rushed in like a flood. Wedding vows spoken with trembling hands, promises made before family and friends, long nights overseas where the thought of coming home to her had kept him alive, all of it shattered instantly. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound he had ever taken in uniform. This wasn't an enemy hiding in the shadows or an ambush on foreign soil. This was the person he trusted most, the one who knew his fears, his scars, and his sacrifices. He didn't shout. He didn't explode with rage. Instead, an eerie calm settled over him, the same calm he felt before missions where one mistake could mean death. His eyes scanned the room, not out of habit, but out of disbelief. This was his home. This was his life. And it was collapsing in front of him. His wife tried to speak, her words tumbling over each other in desperate fragments, excuses, apologies, half-truths that sounded hollow even as she said them. He listened without interrupting, not because he believed her, but because part of him needed to understand how long the lie had lived under his roof. Every sentence felt like another knife, twisting deeper. The man beside her watched silently, sizing him up, mistaking his composure for weakness. That misjudgment would soon matter more than any of them realized. In that moment of raw betrayal, something inside him changed. Love didn't vanish instantly, but trust did. The life he thought he was protecting no longer existed. What remained was clarity. Painful, sharp, undeniable clarity. He had survived war zones, loss, and fear, but nothing had prepared him for the quiet devastation of discovering that the greatest threat he faced wasn't overseas. It was waiting for him at home, smiling, lying, and believing he would never find out. The tension in the room thickened the moment the other man realized this confrontation wasn't ending with excuses and tears. What began as an exposed affair quickly twisted into something far more dangerous. The lover's earlier confidence hardened into hostility, his posture shifting as if he were the one being cornered. He stepped forward slightly, placing himself between the wife and the door, his jaw tight, eyes cold. The air felt charged, like the seconds before a storm breaks. The protagonist could sense it, an instinctive awareness born from years of facing unpredictable men in desperate situations. This wasn't just anger anymore, this was escalation. Words were exchanged, sharp and reckless. Accusations flew, voices rose, and then the lover reached behind him. It was a small movement, almost casual, but unmistakable. When the gun appeared, time seemed to slow. Metal glinted under the room's dim, light as it was raised, shaking just enough to reveal the man's fear beneath his aggression. In an instant, betrayal turned into a lie for death scenario. The room fell silent, broken only by the wife's sharp intake of breath and the pounding of blood in his ears. For the lover, the weapon was meant to end the confrontation, to intimidate, to dominate, to force control over a situation that had spiraled beyond his grasp. He didn't understand what he was doing. Pulling a gun wasn't strength. It was panic dressed up as power. His finger hovered dangerously close to the trigger, and his breathing was uneven. This wasn't a trained man. This was someone who believed fear alone would make him untouchable. The wife began crying, pleading for everyone to calm down, her voice trembling as she begged him to put the gun away. But the threat had already been made. Once a weapon is introduced, there is no going back to a simple argument. The rules change, the stakes rise. The protagonist didn't move, didn't flinch. Inside, his heart was steady, his thoughts clear. Years of discipline took over where emotion tried to surge. He knew panic would only feed the situation. He knew sudden movements could end everything in a single irreversible second. The lover barked commands, telling him to leave, to walk away, to forget everything he had seen. The irony was suffocating, being threatened in his own home by a man who had already stolen his marriage. The gun shook slightly as the lover spoke, betraying his lack of control. Every word made it clearer. This man was afraid of consequences, afraid of being exposed, afraid of losing everything. And fear makes people dangerous. The room felt smaller with each passing second. The walls that once held memories of laughter and safety now echoed with menace. This was no longer about infidelity. It was about survival. One wrong word, one wrong move, and the story would end in tragedy. The lover thought the gun gave him power, thought it erased the truth of what he had done. He had no idea that the calm man standing in front of him was already assessing distance, angles, and intent, not out of aggression, but out of necessity. In that moment, the line was crossed. What should have ended as a painful confrontation had turned into a criminal threat. And the man holding the gun had no idea just how badly he had underestimated the situation he created. The lover kept the gun raised, convinced he now controlled the room. In his mind, the balance of power had shifted completely. A weapon tends to do that. It gives false confidence to those who rely on it, without understanding what it truly represents. He looked at the man standing across from him and saw only a betrayed husband, calm, quiet, unmoving. To him, that calm looked like shock, like fear, like surrender. He smirked slightly, mistaking discipline for weakness, mistaking silence for submission. "What are you going to do?" he sneered, tightening his grip. "You think you're some kind of hero." The words hung in the air. The protagonist met his gaze evenly, his expression unreadable. He had faced men like this before, men who thought dominance came from threats, men who believed violence was the same as control. In war zones, they didn't last long. Still, he didn't rush the moment. He understood timing. He understood psychology. And most of all, he understood that sometimes the most powerful move was revealing the truth at exactly the right second. "I'm going to ask you to lower the gun," he said calmly. His voice wasn't loud, wasn't aggressive. It carried a weight that made the room feel suddenly quieter. "Because you don't want what comes next." The lover laughed, sharp and nervous. "Or what? You'll cry. Call the cops." For the first time, the protagonist shifted his stance slightly. Not forward, not backward, just enough. A subtle adjustment, practiced and deliberate, the kind of movement that meant something only to people who had seen real combat. "I've spent most of my adult life dealing with armed men who panic under pressure," he said, "and it never ends well for them." Confusion flickered across the lover's face. The wife looked between them, her crying slowing as she sensed something changing, something she didn't fully understand but could feel. The air in the room shifted again, but this time the tension wasn't chaotic. It was focused. "You don't know who you're threatening," he continued. "You think a gun makes you dangerous. It doesn't. Training does. Experience does. Discipline does." The lover's smirk faded. "What are you talking about? I'm a Navy SEAL," he said quietly. The words didn't need emphasis. They landed heavy on the floor between them. For a brief moment, there was silence, real silence. The lover's face drained of color as his mind scrambled to process what he'd just heard. He searched for sarcasm, for bravado, for any sign that this was a bluff, but there was none. The calm wasn't fear. It was control. "You're lying," the lover muttered, but his voice had changed. The gun dipped slightly, just an inch, but enough. "I've disarmed men younger than you, stronger than you, and far more committed to pulling that trigger," the protagonist said. "So I'll say this once. Lower the gun, step back, and no one gets hurt." The wife stared at him in disbelief. This was a side of her husband she had never truly known, not because he hid it, but because he had never needed to use it at home. The man she had underestimated, the man she thought she understood completely, suddenly felt like a stranger. The lover swallowed hard. The power he thought he had was evaporating fast. The truth was unavoidable now. He hadn't pulled a gun on a helpless husband. He had threatened a man trained to survive, trained to act, trained to end threats efficiently. And for the first time since this nightmare began, fear changed sides. The gun was still in the lover's hand, but the balance of the room had shifted completely. What seconds earlier felt like chaos was now governed by a cold, controlled stillness. The protagonist didn't rush, didn't bark orders, didn't let emotion creep into his voice. He understood something the other man didn't. Panic spreads faster than bullets. Control, once established, could suffocate it. His breathing was slow and deliberate, each inhale grounding him, each exhale sharpening his focus. This wasn't anger guiding him now, it was training. He subtly widened his stance, distributing his weight evenly, keeping his hands visible but ready. To an untrained eye, it looked like he was simply standing there. To anyone who knew combat psychology, it was preparation. His eyes never left the weapon, not the man's face, not the wife's tears, just the gun. He watched the tremor in the lover's wrist, the tightening of his forearm, the erratic rhythm of his breathing. These details told a clearer story than words ever could. This man was scared, and scared men make mistakes. "Listen to me," he said evenly, his tone firm but controlled. "Your finger is too close to the trigger, your grip is wrong, and you're breathing too fast. That's how accidents happen." The lover's eyes widened. Being analyzed in real time unnerved him more than any threat could have. He adjusted his grip unconsciously, proving the point without realizing it. The wife sobbed softly behind him, frozen between terror and disbelief. The protagonist didn't look at her. Right now, she was a variable he couldn't afford to account for. His priority was simple: no one gets hurt. "Set the gun down," he continued, slowly, slide it across the floor, then step back. The lover hesitated. Pride battled fear, but fear was winning. The authority in the protagonist's voice wasn't loud, but it was absolute. It came from experience, from moments where hesitation meant death. The lover glanced toward the door, calculating escape, but the distance was wrong. The angles were wrong. Everything was wrong. He had lost control the moment he introduced a weapon he didn't know how to use. Seconds stretched painfully long. The gun wavered again. The protagonist stayed still, waiting. He knew rushing would spike adrenaline. He knew patience would force the other man to confront reality. Finally, the lover's arm lowered another inch, then another. The gun touched the floor with a dull, hollow sound and slid forward as instructed. "Step back," the protagonist said. The lover obeyed, Only then did the protagonist move, not fast, not dramatic, just precise. He kicked the weapon out of reach, positioning himself between it and the other man in a single fluid motion. His posture remained relaxed, but the message was clear. The threat was over. The room felt different now, like pressure releasing after being held too long. The lover slumped, the illusion of power completely gone. The wife collapsed onto the bed, shaking. The protagonist finally allowed himself to feel the weight of the moment, but only briefly. Calm under fire wasn't about suppressing emotion forever. It was about choosing when to let it surface. This wasn't victory. It was control reclaimed, and for him, that discipline made all the difference between tragedy and survival. When the immediate danger passed, the silence that followed felt heavier than the threat itself. The gun lay useless on the floor, stripped of its power, just another object now. The lover stood rigid, hands visible, his earlier arrogance replaced by shame and fear. The protagonist reached for his phone and made the call he had hoped he would never need to make inside his own home. His voice was steady as he spoke, clear and factual, describing an armed threat and his location. There was no anger in his words, only truth. Truth no longer needed to shout. The police arrived quickly. Red and blue lights washed over the house, illuminating what was left of a marriage and exposing everything that had been hidden in the dark. Officers secured the weapon first, then separated everyone involved. The lover tried to explain himself, his story stumbling over itself, excuses unraveling as facts replaced emotion. The wife sat quietly, wrapped in a blanket, her earlier tears exhausted into hollow silence. For the first time, she wasn't the center of the story. Choices had been made, and consequences had arrived. The officers listened carefully as the protagonist gave his statement. He didn't embellish, he didn't dramatize, he simply told the truth. About coming home, about discovering the affair, about the gun being pulled. His calm, precise account contrasted sharply with the lover's fractured narrative. When asked about his composure, he mentioned his military background only when necessary. No bravado, no pride, just context. The truth didn't need decoration. The lover was handcuffed and escorted out, his fate no longer in his own hands. As he passed by, their eyes met briefly. There was no triumph in the protagonist's gaze, no satisfaction. Just finality. The man had chosen fear and violence, and now he would answer for it. Justice wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. Later, when the house emptied and the noise faded, reality settled in. The marriage was over. Not because of the gun, but because of everything that came before it. The protagonist stood alone in the living room, surrounded by memories that no longer felt like his. Pain surfaced, then real pain, sharp and unavoidable. But beneath it was something stronger, self-respect. He hadn't lost himself in rage. He hadn't become what the moment tempted him to be. He had survived with dignity intact. In the days that followed, legal processes unfolded. Restraining orders were filed, lawyers got involved. Friends and family learned the truth, some relationships fractured, others unexpectedly strengthened. Through it all, the protagonist stayed grounded. Military training had taught him how to endure chaos, but this taught him something different: how to let go. Justice didn't arrive as applause or praise. It arrived quietly, in court documents, in closed doors, in the freedom to walk away without fear. He didn't win back his marriage, but he reclaimed his life, and that mattered more. The greatest lesson wasn't about strength or combat. It was about knowing who you are when everything you trusted collapses. He had faced enemies overseas, but this battle had been personal. And in the end, he walked forward alone, but unbroken, aware that surviving with honor was the truest form of victory.